Hello, and thanks for joining us for this Spotlight Series segment. I'm James Green. I'm a partner and the VP for Content at ActualTech Media. I've got a very interesting discussion for you today around the principle of GitOps. My guest today is Cornelia Davis, who is the CTO at Weaveworks. Cornelia, thanks for joining us on the Spotlight Series today.
Thanks for having me, James. I'm so happy to be here.
It's going to be a fun chat, and I want to focus a big portion of our discussion around this idea of GitOps. I think that's something that a lot of ActualTech Media's audience has maybe heard recently, but is maybe not very familiar with. So since that's an area where you spend a lot of time thinking and practicing, can you just describe for us the concept of GitOps, and why is that a compelling thing for folks to be thinking about right now?
Yeah. Well, for starters, I think that you're going to find maybe a little bit of a surprise that the way that I would describe GitOps is that it's cloud native operations. And you'll notice that in my description, I didn't actually say Git, I said cloud native operations. And so that's the first thing that I want to share is it's really around a new operational model. It's around an operational model that supports these cloud native environments. But you might ask, well, then, okay, then what's a cloud native environment? What's so unique? Why do we need to have operations around cloud native? So I'll share with you what my definition of cloud native is that I believe that the cloud, fundamentally, the simplest way of representing kind of cloud native is that it is that you're running software in an environment that is highly distributed, more distributed than it's ever been before, and it's constantly changing. So servers are coming in and out, users are coming in and out. We're constantly trying to deploy new versions of software. Partner things are coming in and out. And so GitOps is really about helping you manage your operational cycles in this constantly changing, highly distributed environment. It turns out that Git helps, but it's really fundamentally about modernizing your operational practices.
Now, another thing about, at least that I think about when I think about cloud native applications and infrastructure, is that it is inherently unreliable. We sort of assume when we're building applications like this that we can't rely on, we can't count on the underlying components to be available. How do the principles of GitOps help us get around the fact that infrastructure in the cloud is unreliable?
I love that question because that's fundamentally it. It's constantly changing. It's totally unreliable. And this is something where I'll bring up Kubernetes, and I'm going to talk about Kubernetes a fair bit. But Kubernetes made mainstream a couple of principles that are foundational for GitOps. And those principles are this notion of declaring state, declaring desired state, and then constantly making sure that the actual state is in alignment with that desired state. So it's what we call declarative configuration. And I like to use the term reconciliation. So you're constantly reconciling what is happening in the real world with what you have declared you would like to have in the real world. And those are two fundamental concepts. And that's exactly, that gets at what you were just alluding to, which is unreliable. There's something that's always changing. Something's going away. So I had 5 instances of an application running and some server went poof, and now I only have 3 instances. Well, I've got to compensate for that. Now that's Kubernetes. But GitOps takes it one step further, and it says, we are going to start with these 2 foundational concepts, and now we are going to add to it what these operational life cycles are, all the way back to the human beings who are involved in those operational patterns. And that's where you can imagine that Git starts to come in, because Git is where human beings are interfacing.
So one area where cloud native gets really interesting to me is how much of it revolves around the open source community and the open source paradigm, the way of working with software. And I know that Weaveworks has been very involved with the CNCF and with donating projects to the CNCF. Can you talk to us just a little bit about the ethos of open source and how the Weaveworks team thinks about open source in the cloud native world?
Yeah, and in fact, if it's cool, I'll continue telling you a little bit more about GitOps in the context of that open source.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned that Kubernetes brings these two ingredients, but that GitOps brings more. So what more does GitOps bring? Kubernetes alone doesn't give you what you need with GitOps. So what it brings is it brings saying, well, okay, I'm going to declare my configuration, my desired state. Where am I going to put that? So I've got to put that somewhere. And spoiler alert, that somewhere is in Git. And then I have to figure out how to get it from Git into the environment where Kubernetes, for example, can execute on that. So I need to do some delivery, like continuous delivery. So GitOps takes these two kind of foundational principles, adds in Git, and adds in continuous delivery. By the way that it does continuous delivery is exactly the same model that we talked about before, is you declare how you would like your continuous delivery to happen, and then it constantly reconciles and makes sure that that's exactly what's happening. So that's the full gambit. Now, going back to the open source, what we've done at Weaveworks is we coined the term GitOps, and we invented, or for ourselves at least, invented some of these practices. And once we had some great success with them, we donated that into the open source. And the flagship Git project that we donated into the open source is a project called Flux. So you can find it under the Flux CD organization on GitHub. And there's a number of different projects in there. And what Flux does is it brings that element of, it ties the Git part, which is where the humans are working and declaring their desired state, into the runtime environment, which is something like Kubernetes. And that's what Flux brings in. There's another project that we call Flagger, which we're in the process of donating to the CNCF, which is around progressive delivery. Progressive delivery says, okay, well, when I'm doing that continuous delivery process, I want to see what's happening in the runtime environment and adjust my delivery process to adapt to those constantly changing things that are happening in the runtime environment. And that's what actually a good friend of Weaveworks, James Governor, who is with RedMonk, had coined the term progressive delivery. And that's what this Flagger project does. And we have a number of other projects that are in the open source as well.
Excellent. So last question for you. How can Weaveworks help people get started? And I think this is a very important question because if you get started without a very clear idea of where you're headed, something that I know from experience and from having heard from lots of other people is that it's very hard to go back and do it right a second time. Like once you're going, you're kind of going. And so it's important to get started correctly. How can Weaveworks help with that?
Yeah. So I'll use an anecdote, actually, is that when folks got started, and I think a lot of the listeners are going to say, when we got started with writing cloud native applications, we started writing these microservice-based applications. There was a lot that we didn't know, and we learned a lot of patterns as we went along, and we had the Netflix of the world that helped us understand what service discovery and circuit breakers and those types of things were. What is happening now is that we've made it quite a ways in understanding how the optimum software architectures are, but we haven't made it quite as far in understanding how to keep those things up and running and to constantly be delivering those into those runtime environments. So what we're really asking folks to do in the industry right now is modernize the way that they're doing cloud native, the way that they're doing operations, delivery and operations. So that's the place that you need to understand that you need to go, is you have some pain points today. You still have ticket-based systems, or you run a script. Let's say you've put in infrastructure as code and you've run the script, but now it's not stable because things are constantly changing, and I have to have my operators rerun scripts, and rerunning scripts doesn't work that well. So the understanding that the pain that you're feeling is that you haven't modernized your operations, and that modernizing your operations is where you want to go. That's step one. And then that's the business that Weaveworks is in. We create open source projects that help you along that way, but we also have consulting services. So we can do, for example, a several week engagement where we just help you understand what is that endpoint for you? What does cloud native operations, what are the first two steps of cloud native operations look like for you? And what are the benefits you're going to get from that? And then we also have a platform which takes a lot of these concepts and applies them to the Kubernetes space. So we will help you manage your Kubernetes clusters in a cloud native operational way. Or if you've already got clusters, we'll help you manage the layers above that. We'll help you manage those workloads in a very modern operational practice.
That's so interesting, and this has been an enlightening conversation on the subject of GitOps for me, and I'm sure for our audience. If this struck a chord for you and you're looking to learn more about GitOps as a principle, or perhaps about how Weaveworks can help guide you down this path, help you get started on the right foot, you can learn more about Weaveworks as a company at weave.works. And if you've enjoyed this Spotlight Series segment and you want to watch some more like it, you can find the whole series on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ActualTechMedia. There's a whole playlist there full of overviews like this one, and you can find more to watch there. Cornelia, it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. I really enjoyed hosting you on the show, and I so much appreciate your time for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.